Hello, welcome to part two of the question time for TFF members, where we get our opportunity to ask Defra, Janet Hughes from Defra in particular, questions we have related into the new SFI scheme. I'm Clive Bailye. As I've mentioned, Janet Hughes from Defra is joining us again today, and she's going to answer the questions that members of the Farming Forum have placed. We haven't selected the questions, they're selected by the members. They're able to upvote and downvote the ones that they feel are most relevant. Just to mention before I get into questions with Janet, is just to clear up a bit of confusion that there was a few weeks ago around the application date for SFI pilot applications. There was a bit of a change from the 1st of September, and then it was moving to the end of the month, and then we weren't sure. So Janet, if you just wanted to clear it up before we got into questions, I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, very happy to. Hi, everybody. I'm Janet, Programme Director for the Future Farming and Countryside Programme. Delighted to be here today answering your questions. On the SFI pilot, we decided to extend the deadline for applying. And the reason we did that is because we always knew it was going to be a bit tough to be filling in applications during harvest season, but obviously this harvest season was particularly difficult because it was quite stoppy-starty with the weather, and we were getting feedback from people saying they just couldn't do it in time, and we didn't want people to miss out. So I know that for some people, they had really worked hard to try and meet the deadline, and that was a right pain. So we're very sorry about that. We thought on balance, it was better to extend the deadline to the end of September. So if you were somebody who expressed an interest in the pilot and you want to take part and you haven't applied yet, then there is still time. You can apply before the 30th of September. That's the last day. I think when we announced it, I was on holiday at the time, but I think when we announced it, we had a bit of a issue, shall I say, with actually publishing the date on gov.uk. We made a mistake and then we retracted it and then we published it again. I'm really sorry that happened. That's really unhelpful for people. And I know there was some confusion about it. We've reviewed how we do this to make sure we can't make that sort of mistake again. Unfortunately, with humans involved, sometimes these things do happen. And the best we can do is fix it as quickly as possible and make sure we learn about how not to do it again. So that's what we've done.
Great. Oh, my application's ready to press the button on. I think it's
great.
Hopefully I've done it correctly or whatever. Does that affect schedules and things like payment dates as well, though, Janet? And when we've got to get things established by?
We have. We've written to everybody who's participating in the pilot, actually, because we're going to make, we had said we thought we would make payments monthly, and for a range of reasons to do with how we think that will work for farmers and also how we need to deliver it. We have decided that we're going to start with quarterly payments. And so the first payments will be from February next year. The first agreements we'll start entering into from November, and the first payments from February next year. And again, that's a change of plan from what we originally said. We are going to do some changes in the pilot because it's a pilot and the whole point is to learn and adjust as we go. But on that particular one, we could have realized earlier that we were going to do quarterly payments, and we should have done. And we've again reviewed, like, how did we get into this situation? Let's make sure we're giving people good notice if we're making any changes like that. And we'll see how it goes with quarterly payments. We want to make sure we can administer it smoothly and that it works effectively for farmers. If it turns out quarterly payments aren't frequent enough, we'll look at increasing the frequency. If it turns out actually it's not the right, we need to go slower, then we'll go slower. And the people participating in the pilot, those wonderful people who are going to take part and help us shape this scheme, will help us work out what's the actual best frequency for payments. So I do want to express my massive gratitude to those who are participating in the pilot, because without you, we can't design a scheme that works for farmers. We really need you to take part and help us shape this. And we do take very seriously your feedback. So if you're thinking, why do they keep changing? That's terrible. The reason we're changing is because we're getting feedback and we're learning and we're adjusting as we go, which is a good thing. We just need to do that in a bit more of a timely way, which we will now be doing for the rest of the pilot.
Great, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and it's good to see that this isn't all set in stone and just lip service as to announcing what you intend to do anyway. You are genuinely, designing things as we go along. So that's great. So should we get straight into these questions a little bit? So
yeah.
the four members' questions. So right, so we've got the first five out of the way in the first half. So we kick off with question number 6, which is, according to Defra's own website, the SFI is designed to pay farmers to manage their land in an environmentally sustainable way. How exactly does this mesh with the recently announced Environment Agency restrictions on the use of farmyard manures on arable land? Sustainable farming requires the completing of nitrogen cycles. How can farming be sustainable if it's prevented from spreading animal manures onto land destined for cropping?
Thanks very much for the question. I know there's been a lot of interest in this topic and a lot of critical feedback about how this has worked for farmers in particular. And the rules are there for a reason. is the first thing to say. They exist in law for a reason, which is to prevent nitrate runoff polluting rivers. And I think everyone would agree that we should prevent that runoff. However, we also want to make sure that the rules are workable for farmers. I can't speak for the Environment Agency. They're in charge of implementing the rules, and they have issued their note, and everybody has seen it. But there has been some discussion following that about what the rules actually say and are they right, and how they should be implemented, and also how they should marry together with the sustainable farming incentive. And we are, as part of the program that I lead, looking at nutrient management and slurry management in particular from the broadest possible perspective to see how do we prevent the pollution that we want to prevent, whilst also hopefully helping people to see slurry and manure as a resource to be used on land, not just as a waste product. And we want to do that both through regulation and also through incentives, through sustainable farming incentive, and also through the slurry management scheme that we want to introduce, where we're proposing to offer grants and support for people to have better slurry storage. So we are working towards a future where there's much better join up between all these different things. We recognise there isn't as much join up as there should be right now, and that's why we're doing that work. And so stay tuned for further developments on that front, I would say.
Great. Thanks, Janet. There's a similar question later, but we'll cover that when we get to it. And so question 7, what do you consider the maximum acceptable percentage of the total budget to be spent on administration, support and compliance? And what do you consider the minimum acceptable percentage of total budget going to farmers who have forfeited this money?
So the government have been very clear that in their manifesto and in subsequent commitments, including the agricultural transition plan that we published last November, that the £2.4 billion that we're going to spend on average each year during the Parliament is for money to be going out to farmers and land managers. It's not for administration. There always has been, through the Rural Development Programme for England, a £20 million allocation out of that 2.4 billion for what's called technical assistance. And that is used to support the development and implementation of schemes. But there's a cap on that of 20 million. And we said in the agricultural transition plan that that cap would remain in place. There is a spending review going on at the moment. So all government spending is under review again, but that is a commitment that has been previously made both in the manifesto, in the last spending review, and in the agricultural transition plan. And that's our view as to where that should stay.
Okay, that makes sense again. So thank you. Next question then, can Defra give categorical assurance that EIA legislation will not apply to land entered into ELMS? It seems like Natural England are attempting to use the EIA system to prevent land entered into long-term environmental schemes from ever returning to its previous use. What do Defra have to say about this?
So and for those who aren't, sorry, go on.
Sorry, related this as well, the same person also asks, what happened to the payment by results idea? But we did cover that in part 1 of this, I think, to some extent.
Okay, so we can cover payment by results for anyone who didn't listen to part 1. On payment, actually, I'll start there. Payment by results is, on the face of it, really attractive because we're rewarding people for producing really good outcomes on their land. However, when you start looking at it in detail, it's very hard to design a payment by results scheme when nature's involved, and to do so in a way that's fair and reasonable, because the results you get will depend on all sorts of things outside your control, like your location, the weather, which particular field a bird fancies landing on the day that you're being inspected, and all sorts of other factors. And so we have been looking at payment by results through our tests and trials, where we've got more than 3,000 people, including lots of farmers and land managers, testing things on the ground to see how can we make this work. We have looked at payment by results there. We're continuing to look at it because we like the idea in principle of rewarding people for really good outcomes. But for now, we think the fairest way to manage particularly the sustainable farming incentive is to pay people for actions, because we know from the science that those actions on average in general will result in good outcomes, and we want farmers to have the certainty that if they do those actions they will get paid for them, rather than having to pay to do things on their land, not really sure whether they'll get the results in the time frame of the scheme that they're in. So we think that's fairer and more reasonable and more consistent for people for now, but we are keeping payment by results under review. On the EIA regs, so these regs, like all rules, they exist for a reason, which is to protect semi-natural and precious habitats from being damaged through agricultural cultivation. And where they tend to be applied in relation to schemes is where you've gone into a scheme to create a new habitat or some other such change that ought to be long-term. And what we can't do for government is pay you to do that, and then as soon as you get to the end of your 5-year scheme, plough it all up and start again, because there was no point paying for you to do it in the first place. And so there are appropriate uses for those regulations. If you don't like the way they've been used, there is an appeals process. So Natural England manage the application of those regulations. If you don't like the way that they've been applied, there is an appeals process where the Secretary of State can judge whether they've been applied in the right way. So if the person asking the question's got a particular worry, then I'd point them towards the complaints and then appeals process, which you can follow to make sure that that's your protection, to make sure that the regulations are being applied in the right way.
Okay, so there's quite a relationship actually between those two questions, because exactly what you say is spot on there for my own circumstance. If you were to pay me by results, say for increasing soil organic matter, after 15 years of cover cropping and no-till and conservation agriculture, the best thing I could do to get the best result is plough it all up in year one and start again, because it's difficult for me to make big gains. So, but I'm still performing the correct action. So yeah, that makes
and we want you to maintain the progress that you've made. We're not just we don't want people ploughing things up and starting again, because that's really bad outcome for the environment. And it's of course it's crazy. We want you to carry on doing what you're doing and to pay you to maintain that carbon level in your soil. And so how do we fairly say to you, well, your result is that you maintain it and somebody else's result is that they increase it? So it's not impossible, but it's not obvious how to do it in a fair way.
Yeah, great, thank you. Question 9, and this does go back to that first question 6 actually. So apologise if it's repeating itself a little bit, but the question's being asked saying, can we have a set of rules from government that we can actually work with? It seems SFI want to encourage soil health for cover crops, organic matters and direct drilling, but we're told the EA are not wanting organic matter spread before sowing autumn crops. Why does buffering a watercourse weigh so little? Sorry, it's a question within a question there again. It must be a simple win, ticking lots of boxes. Price it at a reasonable return for the farmer, and you're going to get good results from that. So,
so I think we've covered the kind of first bit, which is that we do want to support those sustainable practices, absolutely. And we're looking at how we do that through the whole range of levers that we have, whether it's regulation, enforcement, scheme participation, or grants. And we've got in the same program, the reason we've got all those things together in one program is so that we can come up with a coherent way forward. That's quite a complicated task. It's going to take us a while, and we partly rely on farmers giving us feedback and telling us and participating in co-design what works and what doesn't. So if you're watching this or listening to it and you think, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? Why don't they think about this issue? Please get in touch. We'd love you to take part in some of our workshops and our co-design and our user research to help us really understand what works for you, because we are really committed to making sure this set of reform works for farmers, because if it doesn't, then it doesn't work for anybody and we don't get the outcomes that we're here to achieve. So do get in touch and take part. On pricing, we said in June that we were reviewing all prices under countryside stewardship, and that we were also looking at how to set prices for sustainable farming incentive. We're going to be concluding that review before the end of this year and publishing an updated set of prices. So keep your eyes peeled for that. We have to go through quite a lengthy process to demonstrate that we can evidence the prices that we want to set, and to get collective agreement around government that that's the right set of prices, and we're doing that now. So watch this space. There'll be a further announcement before the end of this year. In principle, though, we do really recognise what's the thrust of that question, that we have to make this a sensible business decision for farmers to take part in producing environmental goods alongside the other goods that they produce on their farm. And what we want is for people to be thinking about production in that broader sense of both food or whatever other products you produce agriculturally, and also wildlife, carbon sequestration, etc. And in order for that to happen, we have to set fair prices, and we very much do acknowledge that fact. And we've said that we've set a direction of travel, and we'll come out later this year with further information about where that's headed.
Great, and that kind of echoes my own experience so far, actually, of completing my pilot application, where the feedback that I will be giving is there was various standards that I could easily have done and would love to have done, and I can definitely see would create big benefit. But the kind of income for gone equation doesn't make it a sound business decision for me at the moment. So it's meant that I've not really done as much as I would have liked to have done under SFI, but hopefully I can feed that back in, and maybe may change the equation on that in going forward. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. Please do feed that back.
Yeah, great. So final question. Would more desires of the SFI be met if farmers could elect to undertake individual actions rather than grouped into progressive levels?
Possibly. And we're open-minded about that. We think at the moment, based on everything we've done so far, that to make the scheme attractive and appealing and easy to manage for as broad a range of farmers as possible, the right thing, and also to get the environmental outcomes and climate outcomes that we're here to try to achieve, the right thing to do is bundle actions together that make sense together and achieve impacts together and kind of hang together as a sensible set of things to do for farmers. But we are doing user research now, and we're also doing the pilot, and we'll see what happens in early rollout. And if what we find is we need to add in more flexibility, then we'll take a look at that. It's worth saying that the local nature recovery scheme we are expecting to be more at the level of individual options and actions. And the difference between sustainable farming incentive and local nature recovery is sustainable farming incentive is universal actions that can be taken anywhere by anyone and will be a good thing. Look after your hedgerows, for example. Whereas local nature recovery is much more about the right thing in the right place. So making space for water type actions, maybe doing planting trees. We don't want you to do that on peat bogs. We want you to do that in the right place. And so there'll be particular things available to you that you can pick that have been prioritized for your local area on top of what you do in SFI, and that will be accessible to all farmers too. But we're at the beginning of quite a long complicated journey here, and what we need to do is discover what works and what doesn't, and then we will adjust our course based on what we learn. So we are open-minded at this stage. That's our current hypothesis, that standards are the best way to do this, and that's what we're testing through the pilot. But if it turns out that doesn't work for people, then we'll change our minds.
Yeah, just on that, Janet, I mean, quick kind of question of my own really that ties in with that. The pilot hasn't been open to people that were in existing countryside stewardship schemes, I guess for simplicity for the pilot to start with. Yeah. But at some point, how will some of those existing countryside stewardship options kind of dovetail and tie in with SFI ultimately? I mean, say for instance, I wanted to use, I've got a good, various standards in SFI, but I wanted to pick and choose, say, AB15 legume fallow mix from countryside stewardship scheme. Will I be able to do that in the future? Will it become all part of SFI? Will CSS still exist as CSS? How's it going to work together? I'm personally a bit confused about.
So eventually, all of the things you do will be done through environmental land management schemes, whether that's SFI or local nature recovery or indeed landscape recovery. And that will be the case from 24-25 onwards. Between now and then, because we're taking this incremental approach to rolling out the new schemes, and we think that's right, because all of the evidence shows, including in Defra's history, but also the rest of government, if you do a big bang release, it will probably go wrong. In the same way that most farmers wouldn't just change their farming system overnight from one to another and just hope it was all going to be fine. Normally you do that incrementally. We're doing the same thing with these schemes. And that means we're double running them for a while. What we're wanting to make sure is that you can, during that time that we're double running, you can do exactly what you just described. So you can take a mixture of, when everything's not available yet through SFI, you can still do things through countryside stewardship. The exceptions to that are, we don't want to pay you twice to do the same thing, obviously. So we're not going to pay you to do hedgerows both through SFI and countryside stewardship for the same hedgerow. But we don't want to pay you to do things that are obviously contradictory. So if you've said you're going to convert a particular area of land to whatever, woodland, we're not also going to pay you for an arable option on that piece of land, because the two things would be contradictory. So long as the two things actually work together, so a hedgerow thing through countryside stewardship and a soil thing through SFI, for example, then you're fine. If they're contradictory or they duplicate, then we won't. Then we have to work. You'll have to choose which one you want to do.
Yeah, great. Because so ultimately, I'd be able to pick and choose perhaps and use some of those rotational options rather than just these more fixed feature.
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually, we'll provide a route to migrate from your countryside stewardship agreements into environmental land management agreements. But we will do that in an extremely careful way, because the last thing we want to do is mess that up and have people who were doing really good things now not able to do them. So it's very important. That's mission critical work for us, that we get that transition right, and we'll work really closely with farmers to work out what's the best way to do that.
Great. Well, that covers the question. So really, I'm hoping you get kind of a good response to the pilot, and everyone gives you lots of feedback, positive and negative, to help you improve and get this right over time. So thank you very much, and thank you on behalf of all the people who've asked those questions that I'm just reading out for them, really. And thank you very much, Janet. And
thanks a lot for having me.
No problem. Speak again soon. Thank you.
All right. Bye.